Flabba boom boom, flaga flogo do gong, figgy la hoodla ha, fla 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 boom bash, the boom hoof, the bath, the boom boom, shiggy la hidla ha boom, flang flang.
Welcome to Backstage at the Enharmonic. I'm your host, Sean J. Kennedy. Today's guest is tenor saxophone player Jerry Weldon. Although Jerry has worked with many jazz luminaries, he's probably most well known for his nearly 3-decade collaboration with Harry Connick Jr. In today's interview, we learn about Jerry's early musical influences while growing up in New York, his first tour with the Lionel Hampton Band, and eventually how he got associated with Harry Connick Jr. A few years ago, Jerry and I actually had the opportunity to play together, and we do reminisce in this interview about it and the interesting circumstances around that event. To say that Harry Connick and Jerry Weldon and all of the other guys in the band are heroes of mine is an understatement. In the late 80s, one of the most played records that I had in my collection were the Volume 1 and Volume 2 of The Tonight Show Band featuring Doc Severinsen. I'd always been a fan of the big bands, but to see Doc Severinsen and The Tonight Show Band play live every night, recording new music, was really exciting. And when it was clear that Johnny was going to leave the air in the early 90s, I was pretty upset. And lo and behold, perfect timing. Harry Connick Jr. hit the scene, and I was able to invest in his music and listen to his recordings and see videos, and Jerry Weldon has been with him ever since. So again, this is a real honor for me to chat with Jerry, and I hope you enjoy this interview and learn something.
Hey Jerry, this is Sean Kennedy.
Sean, how are you?
I'm good, man. Thanks for taking some time and being on the podcast. I really look forward to getting some information about your life and hopefully learning something new.
Right.
So, my first question to all my guests is, what is your earliest recollection of music as a child?
Probably Tony Bennett, Frank Sinatra.
Mm-hmm.
That's my mother and father used to like, they played records all the time. My father was a big jazz enthusiast, and my mother loved Sinatra. So I came up in the 60s and in New York, and there was a radio station called WNEW, and they played all the hits of the day, like Ella Fitzgerald and Basie and Sarah Vaughan and Nancy Wilson, and a lot of Sinatra, a lot of Tony Bennett, a lot of guys like Brooke Benton and Matt Monroe, a lot of singers that aren't around today, but that's my earliest recollection of hearing music and and liking it.
Oh, cool. So it was a lot of singers you mentioned.
Yeah.
What drew you to the saxophone? Did you play something before sax? Was it a school thing? What brought you to the saxophone?
Initially I had guitar lessons when I was about 9 or 10. When all the kids, when the Beatles were out, everybody wanted to play the guitar, and I fell into that for a brief moment, but I grew very, it was a passing thing. But my mother made me, since they bought me the guitar, she made me practice and take lessons, and then I heard Wes Montgomery, and I said, well, I'm never gonna be able to do that, So that kind of fizzled out a little bit, and then I got into high school. I was a teenager, and I sort of drifted back into my father's old jazz records. And I started pulling out LPs and playing them, and it brought back memories. But the music just sounded so good to me, and especially those Brazilian records he had, Jobim and Stan Getz, and that sound, the sound of Getz's tenor, really got me. And from there, I went to Bird, and then I went to a lot of the sound. I like Paul Desmond. I liked a lot. But the tenor, I like the tenor. I like the sound that gets the sound he had. And that initially drew me to the saxophone, and I rented a saxophone from the local music store and started taking lessons, and then really getting from there on in, I was really serious about it.
So, just to make sure my timeline's correct, so you really didn't have any formal music training until high school?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And did you ever? I've talked to a lot of sax players. I know a lot of woodwind guys. So you didn't start on clarinet. You actually started on tenor.
No, I started on the saxophone, which is unusual for the day because they always when you showed an interest in playing the saxophone, they would immediately give you a clarinet, which would make the transition easier to go to the saxophone, which I found out later when I would try to go back and play the clarinet. I had a difficult time with it.
Sure. Now, when you started studying saxophone as a teenager, did you join any of the school ensembles?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was in the marching band, and I was in the orchestra and the all the bands of the school. My high school, we did not have a jazz band. But I played in all the surrounding. I grew up in Queens and in Long Island, and I played in a lot of the high school bands in the surrounding areas. I played in any kind of band I could get into.
Okay.
And that served me well in those years, definitely.
Nice.
Yeah.
And did you also play in in bands outside of school, like rock bands and stuff, or were you mainly just?
Sure. No, I played in. So by this time I would be, as a teenager, we're talking about the early to mid 70s. And at that time, the hot bands were like Blood, Sweat and Tears in Chicago and Tower of Power and Earth, Wind and Fire. They all had the horn, the bands with the horn sections in them. So I played in a lot of those type of bands as well.
Nice.
Yeah. Now, and playing jazz too. I mean, always. I was always a straight ahead. I was always a bebopper at heart.
Now, if I've done my research correctly, it looks like you started playing with Lionel Hampton about 1980.
82, as a matter of fact. 81, the end of 81. Yeah, you're right. Yep.
Okay. So how did that, tell the listeners how that happened. A high school kid playing saxophone in all these bands around New York, and all of a sudden you're playing with an icon of jazz. Well,
I got out of high school, and I knew I wanted to pursue music, as my livelihood. And I was playing gigs around, playing weddings and, doing my thing. I went to college, a local college for a little while, and I dropped out. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was studying with a guy by the name of Paul Jeffrey, who was a great tenor saxophonist. He worked with Monk. In fact, he was Monk's last tenor player. He took Charlie Rouse's place. He worked with Monk. He worked with Mingus. He worked with Dizzy. He was, he was he was the real deal. And he used to teach lessons at a studio in New York called Charles Colin Studios. And I'd go up there and he'd have me transcribe solos and things. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And Paul got the teaching job at Rutgers as teaching saxophone and leading the ensemble. He says, why don't you come down with me to Rutgers, and I could probably get you some money and, some scholarship, and, you come down there and study, which was the best move I ever made because I met a lot of great musicians down there. He started the jazz program, which is still thriving today down at Rutgers University. But Paul was very tight with Lionel. Paul at that time was also working with Lionel Hampton's band. So he kind of groomed myself and most of the saxophone section that played at Rutgers from 79 to 81. We all wound up in Lionel Hampton's saxophone section. Starting first with Tom Chapin, who was a great alto saxophone player and flautist, and he's no longer with us. But he was just a great player, and a good friend. He got out first, and he went right into Hamp's band. Then I joined Hamp's band. Then then a guy by the name of Adam Brenner, who's another great tenor player, plays alto as well. He played alto. David Schumacher followed on baritone, and Doug Miller, who knew Paul from New England, followed on the tenor. So we made up Hamp's section, and we stayed in the band for about 4 or 5 years. So I stayed till about 87. Then I left the band, and then I was back and forth after that. So
okay,
that's how that went down. Yeah.
Now, I guess touring the world with such a jazz luminary, you were afforded some opportunities that most of us are not. Could you just maybe share one recollection or a few maybe of like incredible events you were part of or people you met because you were with Lionel Hampton?
This was during the 80s, especially the early to the mid 80s. Hamp was still in pretty good shape. He was in his 70s at this time, in his early 70s, but he played like a guy that was, his enthusiasm and his swing and his spirit was so strong. He would play. He could play for hours. He could play for hours, and just play these tremendous solos of genius and swing. It's just amazing, while entertaining the audience as well, and while putting on a show and still putting forth this great music at a very, very high level. So it was very inspiring to a guy of my age to be up on the bandstand every single night, because Hamp would play from the first downbeat to the last note. He would play with such intensity and such energy that you had to get with it, or you were going to get left behind. So that's stuck with me even to this day, and I just turned 60 now, so it's amazing where the time goes. But I still bring that intensity to every job I play. So that's the first thing I got from him. Now, he was working all the time in the States, but he was very, very, very popular in Europe. He was, with the passing of Louis Armstrong about a decade earlier. Louis passed in early 70s. Ham was kind of Louis Armstrong, especially in France and in Germany and the European countries. He was a superstar. We played all the big jazz festivals. We did 3 European tours a year, one in the spring, one in the summer, and one in the winter. And he was a true icon over there. So we were working all the time. Hamp was working all the time, and we had so many great musicians come in and out of the band. To name a few, Frankie Dunlap was still playing drums when I joined the band. Frankie was Monk's drummer for many years and is well known, and a great big band drummer as well as a small group drummer. He played on all those great Maynard Ferguson records from the 50s, from Birdland and early 60s, and then he was with Monk and Sonny Rollins, and he played with everyone. Well, he was a drummer in Hamp's band, and he would still bring guys like Illinois Jacquet and Arnett Cobb would come out and do European tours with us, or guest shots, So he had such a rich and deep history that it was. I'll tell you another funny. Here's another. This is typical of when you work with Hamp. Now we finished the job. We came back into town. We were doing a one-nighter somewhere. We were getting off the bus, and Hamp said, "Oh, we have a party to play later this afternoon. A private party at some guy's apartment in Manhattan. Some guy had a big apartment on Park Avenue, and he had this cocktail party, and he had Lionel Hampton play for his party." So one of the guys in the band who was supposed to be on the job said, "Oh, Hamp, you didn't tell me about that. I can't make it today. It's too short notice. I got something else." So the job fell. So he turned around and said, "Okay, how about you?" I had just been in the band a few months. He said, okay, how about you? You make it. I lived in the neighborhood. So I said, yeah, fine, I'll be there. Nothing else was said. I get to the job, and I walk in the guy's apartment, and there's Frankie Dunlap at the drums, and they're setting up. And there's, I think it was our bassist at the time. I forget who it was, and Hamp hadn't arrived yet. And at the piano is Teddy Wilson, right? Teddy Wilson's on the gig, right? He's there.
Wow.
So I got to work with Teddy Wilson. You know.
Wow.
Those types of things would happen at in some form of regularity. You know what I mean? So yeah. So this is just one of the stories. And I had forgotten about that. This is 1982, right? And I'd forgotten all about that. And then I just happened to see Teddy. I picked up a CD. I said, "Damn, I played with Teddy Wilson." So that's just one of the deals.
Wow, that's incredible.
But,
what a rich,
I got to play with so many good. I got to work. I played with Dizzy. I played with Stan Getz and Zoot and Freddie Hubbard, and so many guys would Getz do a 2-night tour, do a 3-night run with us, as an extra feature with Ham. So this was these are all good memories.
Have you ever written a list down to keep track of who you played with?
I should, but I haven't. Yeah. I haven't actually written down a list. But you gave me an idea. I might have to do that.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see the heritage of jazz luminaries that you've worked with over the years.
Yeah, I work with quite a few of them. Absolutely, sure.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So jumping ahead, of course. I first heard your great saxophone playing with Harry Connick when I was coming up on TV and recordings and all that. So could you enlighten us on how you got hooked up with Harry Connick Jr.? It leads us right back to Lionel Hampton once again. We did a 2-week run in New Orleans. Among the places we played, there was a joint called there was a hotel called the Fairmont, which is the old Roseville Hotel, and they had a ballroom called the Blue Room, and they would bring acts down there, and you would go down and you work for 2 weeks at this spot, which was, after making one-nighters all the time, 2 weeks, especially in a town like New Orleans, is you could do a lot of damage. And Harry was in high school. And he was, getting quite a reputation for himself already. He was going to NOCA, which is the performing arts school. And Hamp, he came by, and Hamp let him sit in with the band. Hamp knew Harry's father was a DA of New Orleans, Mr. Connick, and Harry came by one night and sat in with the band, and already he could play. He was already gigging in New Orleans, and I went by and sat in with him, and we kind of just met briefly, and he came to New York a couple of years later. He moved to New York and started gigging, and actually got the gig as Hamp's piano player for a very, very short time. Wow. And
he was already he was already making connections, and he was getting ready to get signed with Columbia, and he was like, we got to renew our little acquaintance, and he said, "Man, I'd like us to play more together. If I ever get a band, would you consider working with me?" And of course, I said, "Of course," And the next thing I knew, he had left the band and he had gone out, started working on his own, and him and Ben Wolf were playing working a lot as a duo, and they were starting to work some of the clubs around New York, and. He made I saw him on television a few times. He was starting to make the talk show thing, and I was like, "Oh man, he's getting popular." And then Harry Met Sally came out, and the record was a huge hit. And then he got his own band together, and true to his word, the phone rang. I had left Hamp's band already. I've been out of the band. I was working with Jack McDuff a lot. You remember Jack McDuff, the organist?
Mm-hmm.
Brother Jack McDuff, and I was working a little bit with Jimmy McGriff, and I was working locally around New York and working with Matt Duff. And Harry called me, true to his word, and he said, "We got a tour going out in the summer," and I said, "I'm in." And that was June of 1990, and we went out, and we pretty much worked from June of 90 till the end of 1993, pretty much nonstop.
Wow.
States, we went through the States, we went to Japan, we went to Europe, we went to Australia. We went everywhere.
Incredible.
Mhm.
Yeah, some of those albums are like, they're in my top 10. What is it? The one We Are in Love.
We Are in
Blue Light,
Love.
Red Light.
Blue Light, Red Light was my first date with him.
Okay.
Blue Light, Red Light, and then he did the Christmas record, and then we did. I forget after that. We did quite a few though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unbelievable, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if you're, just real quick, the listeners might find this interesting. You and I had a chance to play together once on some real quick gig, and I was introduced to you real quick backstage. Like, this is Jerry, the sax player. I'm like, hey, how you doing? And we get on stage and we start playing, and I didn't put anything together yet. And the guy who was in charge of the band goes, ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Jerry Weldon. And I'm playing drums going, Jerry Weldon, Jerry Weldon. And in the middle of the tune, I'm like, oh, my God, that's Harry's tenor player. And I think I apologized to you after the tune. I'm like, dude, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were the Jerry Weldon.
No, that's okay, man. No.
Yeah, it was
man.
cool.
No, that was
Yeah, it was funny. I'm like, that's the guy? Yeah, it was very funny.
I remember that. I remember that. Yeah.
Music takes us all to a really unbelievable, interesting places.
It's amazing, isn't it? You just never know. You just never know.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Do you have any interesting stories about playing in a special venue or a special circumstance with Harry, where maybe you were kind of like I did with myself when I kind of pinched myself that I was playing with you? Do you have anything specifically with Harry, like anything where you're like, I can't believe I'm doing this? This guy from New York who plays saxophone.
Oh, yeah. I don't think you ever... I try not to lose that. Like I said, it comes back from playing with Hamp. I never lose the enthusiasm, no matter how, rigorous the travels are and sometimes you're traveling a long distance to make one job. And in fact, right now I'm in Florida. I'm on a tour with Harry. We're about to start a 3-week tour, and tonight is the opening night. I'm in Fort Myers, Florida, and we open tonight, and we've got rehearsal in a little while, and it's just another tour. I can't believe it's been. I've been with Harry off and on for 28 years now. He started in 1990. Here it is, 2018, and I've been a part of most of his musical endeavors, which is really quite unbelievable.
Yeah.
I'm trying to wrap my head around being 60 years of age. That's a sobering thought. One day you'll get there, Sean.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's truly amazing. Truly amazing.
This wasn't one of my planned questions, but you've kind of like planted the seed in my head. You're planning a tour right now. You're on tour.
Yes.
How much do you guys rehearse, like pre-tour?
We had a rehearsal last night for about 3 hours, and we will have another 3-hour rehearsal today. And then after that, we won't rehearse as much unless he writes something new, which he does quite often. Like he had a couple of new things we had to go over last night, and we'll probably revisit those today. And we'll throw in some of the old things and a couple of new things. So he's always got something up his sleeve. So we'll have another pretty intense rehearsal this afternoon, and then it'll probably ease up after that. Harry kind of likes to rehearse to a point, and then likes to let that spontaneous thing take run its course throughout the shows. You'll never get two of the same exact shows with Harry, which is part of his genius.
Mm-hmm.
His musical
What's one of your
genius,
favorite Harry charts to perform?
We Are in Love. I always loved that one. And he's written about 3 or 4, maybe even more. He's always retweaking and redoing that arrangement. We've played about many, many different arrangements of that, but that's always a tune I always loved from and he wrote that. He was young when he wrote that. That's a very, very hip tune. He's also got another tune called Nowhere with Love, which I always liked a lot, and which we don't actually do as much. But I always enjoy playing that. He's a great songwriter. He really is. He writes beautiful melodies, and he really is tremendous. He's a great musician. People don't realize how great a musician he is. They see him on television, and he's a great actor as well, and a personality. Mm-hmm. He's a great, thorough and tremendous musician on a very, very, very high level. A writer, an arranger, and a pianist. Well, I don't have to tell you that. You know that. But I think it gets overlooked sometimes. It needs to be pointed out.
Oh yeah, a lot of times just casually, I think I compare him a lot to a Nat King Cole. A lot of people just think he was a singer.
Yeah.
But when you go down,
that's a pretty good comparison. Because Nat Cole was that great of a pianist, and Harry is too. He really is.
Right.
And, yeah. As well as a singer, of course.
Oh, sure, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So you've had a really unique career. You essentially started your career with a pioneer of jazz, from the beginning of the 20th century. And now we're at the beginning of the 21st century, and the business has changed so much. A lot of students and young people listen to this podcast. And do you have any advice you'd give to kids or young people that want to get into the music business now?
Listen first. Listen. It's interesting you say music business, because there is a business end to this, of course, but first you got to be proficient on whatever it is that you do. And if you're really, really serious about this music and being a musician, you got to know your craft, and you got to know your instrument. And that the first thing you got to do is listen to everything you can listen to. Listen to the guys, like all the guys that influenced me. Well, initially were saxophone players, and what I would do is I would spend a lot of time copying music, learning solos, copying the styles of some of these guys, which was what all the great legends that we love and we look up to did. Sonny Rollins. Mm-hmm. Sonny Rollins loved Bird and Coleman Hawkins. So Sonny Rollins started trying to play exactly like Coleman Hawkins and Bird, and and what you get from that is Sonny Rollins. Jackie McLean loved Dexter Gordon and Bird. What you get is Jackie McLean copied Charlie. He said, "I don't care if people tell me I sound like Charlie Parker. I want to sound exactly like Charlie Parker." And when people told him that, as a kid, as a teenager, he thought it was he loved it. Eventually, he became Jackie McLean. Charlie Parker studied Lester Young, learned all of Lester Young solos. So I mean, this is where the lineage comes from. It's not, as a teenager and as a young player and as a young musician, it's not a sin to copy some of these guys, because you got to come through somebody before you sound like yourself. That's where kids get mistaken, and they don't want to copy these guys because they think they're going to have their own style. That's a really, really, really false misconception, because there's a percent of geniuses. That Errol Garner is one guy that is a unique big player. Very few guys you can say sound just like themselves. Everybody came up sounding like someone before them. So that's that's helped me throughout my comeuppance.
That's great advice.
When I was in high school, I wanted to sound like Stan Getz. I wanted to play like. I wanted to be Stan. I wanted to look like Stan. That was my guy, Stan Getz.
Yeah.
Then in '76, Dexter Gordon. I was lucky because Dexter Gordon came back to New York and made a big. It was a very, very big event. He'd signed with Columbia Records and he was making this big return. And I got to see and hear Dexter Gordon in person at the Village Vanguard when he made his return in 1976. And so then Dexter was my man. I wanted to sound like Dexter. I learned all his solos and his sound, which is what I still carry with me today. Because I was fortunate enough to hear these guys. I heard Stan Getz in person. I heard Dexter Gordon in person. I heard Illinois Jacquet and James Moody and Ornette Cobb and Stanley Turrentine. I heard all these guys. I heard them I heard what they sounded like, and it still stays with me. So sound is another thing. Sound. It starts with a sound. You've got to get a good sound on your instrument. You've got to get a good sound. So keep your ears open, listen, get a good sound on your instrument, and pick and go from there. Keep your ears open and go from there. And play with as many different bands and keep yourself open to as many musical situations as you can get into, especially at a young developing, coming up kind of part of your development. So
perfect.
These are little suggestions. Yep.
Yeah, those are great. 3 great things. I just see it working with a lot of kids. They don't want to go back and listen to the old masters because they want to sound like themselves, and you can't sound like yourself if you don't know from them.
How are you going to do that? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You got to learn the language. You have to learn vocabulary. You need to learn sentences. You need to learn how to spell. You need to learn how to write. You need what I mean? You need to know the language and the lineage and the history.
Exactly.
This is what it all comes from, Roy Hargrove,
yep.
He's a perfect example. He's a guy that, he was like the generation behind me. He came to Winton. These guys came from somewhere. You know what I mean? This is how the music and the music goes from there.
Exactly.
So it's not a secret. It's not a secret. This is how, and there's no shortcuts, unfortunately. We're in the age where people just want to be famous for being famous. So you can be famous for being famous now. You know what I mean?
Right. You don't have to do anything.
You don't have to have a lick of talent. So I notice kids, younger guys, they get caught up in this star thing too. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. They want to get their picture on. They want to be on TV. They want to get their picture in the magazine or something. So if that's your trip, then you're in it for the wrong reason.
So you probably don't have much free time, but is there anything you like to do outside of the world of music?
Oh yeah, I'm a big sports fan. I watched the Cavs last night blow it, but a big basketball, big baseball fan and football fan. So I get into I love going to ball games and. I like sports. I love movies. I like the old movies too. I like good movies, good films. I got a few varied interests like that.
Nice.
Yeah.
So speaking of varied interests, would the audience? Could you tell me something you might be listening to now that the audience might be surprised that Jerry Weldon is actually listening to and liking? Some type of music.
Some type of music. Well, what do I got here? Well, I was listening. I don't know, would surprise anybody. I was listening to the Sinatra and Duke Ellington record, which is one of my all-time favorites. Francis A and Edward K. I don't know. I'm surprised that people are surprised that Sinatra and Ellington did an album together. You know, everybody knows the bassy, you know, the Sinatra bassy stuff, which is more popular. You know, the records with Quincy and Neil Hefti and You Fly Me to the Moon and all those great charts, you know, those great bassy things. But Sinatra and Duke Ellington made a beautiful, beautiful record called Francis A and Edward K, which I think gets overlooked because it's a beautiful, beautiful record, and I never get tired. I never get tired of listening to it.
Great. Hope people check that out on your recommendation.
Yeah, I hope so. But I still go out to the clubs. I still go to the clubs and hear different bands, and I still love live music, and I go out and hear it as much as I can when I'm not performing it myself. You know.
Right. So besides hearing about you on this podcast, if the listeners want to find out more about you, where should they go and what should they look up?
Okay, well, I'll tell you, I want to let everyone know that I've got a brand new CD that just came out on the Cellar Jazz label. Corey Weeds. I don't know if you know Corey. He does a great job. He's got a label called Cellar Jazz. Corey's a great saxophonist in his own right, and he's got a label, and I was lucky enough to do a recording for him. It's called Those Were the Days. Interestingly enough, Jerry Weldon, Those Were the Days is the title of the record.
All right.
And it's available on iTunes. It's available on Amazon. It's you can find it on the website. You can go to my website, which is .net, jerryweldon.net. And you just put my name in, and there's a calendar. Lets everybody knows where I'll be. Well, I'll be on this tour, and then when I get back to New York. And please feel free to drop me a line, anyone, and I'll make sure I get back to you. I'd love to hear from you.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Jerry. Thanks for taking the time. It was really interesting, and I hope people learned some things.
John, it's my pleasure, and I want to thank you again for making this happen. It took a little while, but
good things come to those who wait. You know.
Apparently, yeah, that's what they tell me.
All right. Well, have fun on this tour, and I look forward to playing with you again sometime, Jerry.
I appreciate it, Sean. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
To learn more about the musical adventures of Jerry Weldon, please visit his website, jerryweldon.net, and the other links that I have directly under this podcast. I hope you enjoyed this edition of Backstage at the Enharmonic. Thanks for listening.
And you dream that the stars up above have the answer of whether we'll be, whether we won't be in love. Well, we are. Yes, we are. Ooh, we are.